Alright, what's up everybody? This is week 2 of the JYD Dojo ZVP series from the Protoss angle. Hopefully you've also watched the Zerg side. Remember, we're doing this kind of in parallel with each other, so we're kind of going through both sides of the build, and it's important if you play Zerg that you watch the Protoss, and if you play Protoss that you watch the Zerg side, right? If you don't understand what's happening on your opponent's side, and like the pressure points there and what they're thinking and what they're trying to do, then it's just going to leave you in the dark. So hopefully this has been helpful. In this video, I'm going to focus on the next 2 minutes of the game for this build, which is 7:30 to 9:30. Hopefully you guys have been completing your tasks, getting this build order ready. You know, just to kind of recap, notice we went for this +1/+1 zealots. I've got 5 of them here. I've got 8 of them there. I got +1 just about finished. I've got 44 probes evenly spread across both bases. You know, roughly you want to have 20-ish here and you want to have 15 there. So hopefully you guys are, you know, measuring these benchmarks, you're tracking them, and that you're able to get this without an opponent, right? And hopefully as you play against an opponent, you can approach these benchmarks over time, and that these builds start becoming second nature, so that you can start focusing on other parts of the game that are just as important. So let's kind of move forward with this build. I'm gonna before I move on to the tactical stuff, I'm gonna talk about the build, and then we'll talk more about the tactics. Last week, another metric I asked to track was making sure that the Templar archives started right at around 6:30. Okay, don't forget this. Okay, don't forget it, because a good Zerg will come punish you if they notice that your Templar archives are late. Now, sometimes if you put it in the corner, you know, maybe they can't quite scout it without losing Scourge, but you really open yourself up to a lot of things, and you lose control of the game if you don't have your Storm up in time. Usually, I like to make my High Templar first. Usually, you should try to have a second gateway by the time your Templar archives is done. It's a little bit later here. I try to make 2 High Templar and then Storm. I made the Storm first because I messed up a little bit. My gateway's a little bit late, but that's okay. From this point on in the next 2 minutes, don't make any probes. That's contrary to everything that I said in the first video, right? Because in the first video I said, make sure you have your probes, right? In the second video here, don't make any probes, okay? The whole point of you making all your probes in the first video was so that you don't have to make any probes in this portion of the game, okay? And if you can get your 44 probes out of the way in the first 7 minutes, you don't have to worry about it in the next 2. And if you can execute correctly on these next 2 minutes, you can put yourself in a very pretty position to win for the rest of the game, right? So how you execute, how you multitask, how you follow through with your build here is going to be the determinants between a good and a great player. A good player and a great player, an amateur level player and a pro level player, they all have different skill levels, especially at this phase of the game, based off your multitask, and there's always things to work on. So again, let's move forward with the replay. I'm not going to look at the units. Again, we're assuming our opponents at the bottom right. Notice as I move out, I make 2 additional gateways, right? This is kind of like that concept of attacking. Like, the best defense is a good offense, right? So you attack, you make your gateways behind. And one of the biggest tips here is, how many gateways can you make before making a cannon? Think of that as like a little mini game. Think of that, okay? A cannon and a gateway cost the same amount of money. I would recommend that you almost always make at least 2. You could even make this second cannon a little bit earlier to hedge against like a potential hydra bust if you're not sure. You can make the second cannon to hedge against any like Ling run bys that might come and snipe this and just wreak havoc on you. I'd say like 3 is an average number against the 5-hatch hydra play, but you should build that third cannon on site, okay? And I believe in this game, I decide to make the third cannon because I'm assuming my opponent's going 5-hatch hydra, and I recognize that they make a decent number of hydras, right? Upon the third cannon, that's going to dictate how fast your 5th and your 6th gateways are going to be, right? So let's just say I only make 3 cannons, so I make gateways 5 and 6, right? Before 8 minutes, right? And notice that I'm also going to 4 High Templars as soon as I can. And I want you to stop right at 4 High Templars. No more, no less. And right at 8:30, I'm going to have 2 storms ready. Maybe I'm off by 1, but as long as you have it roughly around 8:30, it should be okay. And what I'm doing with these units over here is ensuring that my opponent is not going for an all-in Hydra bust, okay? So let's assume they're not going for an all-in Hydra bust. Maybe they're kind of fainting here and there. Notice right at 8:30, I've got just about 2 storms. It's a little bit late, right? A little bit late, but that's okay. But I have them here. My 4th High Templar is coming out. I'm not making any more probes, right? And I'm just kind of moving on with my build, right? So this is an important part because if they go for a Hydra all-in, you need to have those 2 storms and 2 more storms on the way to help defend that. If they were going for a Hydra all-in, you want to move up to like at least 6 cannons, make them ASAP, and bring your units back home either to flank or to threaten a counterattack and whatnot. So that's kind of the build that I want you to focus on. I'll kind of come back to it, but I want to pause there for a bit so that I can talk a little bit more about the tactics, okay? So let's just not look at our base, and let's just only look at our units. You see how I try to move them together. If you have 5+1 Corsairs, you can fire down Scourges if you see them in time, and they won't be able to connect with you, okay? So make sure you target those down. Usually, against the Zerg player going 5-hatch Hydra, I'm assuming in this game that they're expanding here, but they could have very well expanded over at the 3 o'clock side, right? A lot of Zergs like to take the space because there's a gas and it's a little bit more resources to work with. If they go for like this 3rd base over here, I would go there first, right? And I'm not saying that's a hard and fast rule, but here's the reasoning why. Remember, if they have 5-hatch Hydra, only 2 of their hatcheries are going to be over here, right? Whereas over here, they have the main base, they have another hatchery here, a 3rd hatchery here, and usually they have a pretty good wall, right? So it's less likely that you'll do damage at the main base unless their wall sucks. But if you look at the base over here, if you just kind of imagine there's like hatchery, maybe like, an Evo chamber or something, there's a lot of holes that Zealots can kind of slide through and do damage while your Corsairs are wrecking havoc, okay? So that's why I think it's easier to go bust the 3rd base rather than the natural. But in this game, I don't go over there because I assume that it's kind of closer to here. And just as a general rule of thumb, the closer their 3rd base is, the less odds that you'll have to succeed, okay? Just kind of remember that, right? I'm not saying, again, this isn't a heuristic to make your decision or not, but if it's a further base, more odds that you just pull the trigger and go. And you really want to make sure that your Zealots can get on top of all the Hydras and attack simultaneously rather than kind of clumping up against the wall. So again, more opportunities to do that at the other bases. This is going to be map dependent, but that's kind of the tactics that I want you to know. If you don't pull the trigger, and again, in this game, I'm not pulling the trigger, obviously because I don't have an opponent, you want to run around. Don't say, oh, this didn't work, I'm just going to send all my units back home. Never, ever send your Zealots back home. Sending your Zealots back home is a rookie move, okay? You would only send them home if they're going for a 5-hatch Hydra all-in if you need to. And even still, then you could still flank them from behind, okay? So don't send them back home unless you're at risk of getting busted. Ever, okay? Don't send them back home. Your units are fast enough to run away so that they don't take any damage. And so you just want to look at the entire map. And the important part that you're scouting for within the 730 to 830 range is if they're sending Hydras to come all in to kill you, okay? You're trying to figure out the pathway for the Zerg. Are they going a macro play, right? Or are they going for a 5-hatch Hydra all in? And you have to scout that, okay? And especially as your Corsairs are kind of just scouting, you could kind of look to see, like, at around the 8-minute mark, are they making drones or are they making Hydras, right? If they're making drones, then they're probably going to the macro play. If they're making Hydras still, then they either suck or you're at risk of getting busted, right? So if they're making Hydras and they're kind of moving out, then you should probably make a 4th cannon. You just make like additional cannons based on the risk of the situation. But that's the #1 thing you're scouting for with the Corsairs. and you're looking for any openings that you can. And this is going to be dependent on your skill level, okay? If you don't have the APM to like deal with all of this, and it's okay, I would recommend at least, let's say you're like a lower level player, I would just say move your zealots over to the side of the map over here. You don't have to run them around left and right, but just move them away somewhere and just check like their 4th base once, and then just move back. Okay, don't do this whole like moving constantly, multitasking like your BCU. Just move them around to this corner over here, run away if hydras are chasing you, and then go check their 4th base. And I would say the scouting information, it's better if you're just scouting with the Corsairs rather than moving to, like this, right? What I'm virtually doing is I'm looking for an opening, okay? If you watch the Zerg video, you'll see that a Zerg could make a 4th base hatchery pretty soon. And you can punish that with these zealots just running around. Like, let's say they just started it, and then you just come and snipe it, and then or you cancel it, and you just run away, right? That's the kind of thing that you want to deny from the Zerg. Or let's say they're like not making 45 drones. Let's say they make 55 drones off of their initial 2024 hydras. You have to punish that, right? Because if they just go 55 drones, right? I mean, I guess they could do that if they only sit within their base. But if they move out, they leave exposure, right? Because they can't possibly defend 4 bases with only 2024 hydras and their overlords all at once. So there must be an opening, and the game is for you to figure out which area could I have pressed or could I have scouted to punish the Zerg for being too greedy, okay? And if they're being too safe, don't feel the need to just attack and donk into their army, okay? You're totally fine if you don't do any damage, but as long as you don't lose any units yourself, okay? That's the key. Don't feel the need to have to do damage. Just try to pick things off and control the game, kind of like controlling Mutalisks, right? You're controlling the game, you're kind of corralling the hydras, making them stay honest, making them babysit their overlords, and that's just the pressure you need to do, right? And as you scale with your level, this will become easier as you kind of execute on your builds, and it's just a very high level move. But again, if you can't do it, just try to focus with the Corsairs. Just ask yourself, are they making drones at around 8 minutes or not? Are they moving out with their hydras or not? Just focus on those 2 things to answer those 2 questions, and and you'll be good. Okay, that's just all I ask of you. Another thing that I realized, and this is kind of coming back to the build, is there's multiple ways that you can play this. You can go for like a super duper zealot heavy composition. I usually don't like that off of Forge Fast Expand. I find that to be a little bit better on a gateway expand type game. But it also depends on how much damage that you've done. But I like to make my robotics facility really early. And I noticed that this thing was so underrated, right? Like I used to underestimate how much a fast robotics facility impacted your ability to apply pressure, right? Because right now they're getting their lurker upgrades, and it should be out, in about 30, 45, roughly around like 9:45 to 10. Having the observer out means that you don't have to worry about some random straggling lurker over here. You can even punish them if they don't have any units, because they don't expect observers until later. And you certainly don't want to have observers like too late. So I like to get it like just under 9 minutes. I think here I got it closer to like 8:40, which might be a little bit too early, and it's a little bit too optimistic because I'm like playing on single player. But try to get it around 9 minutes. Notice that I've added 8 gateways, and that's the total amount of gateways that I want to have for any normal 2-base build. That's not all in. And it's really just a matter of getting your gateways up in time. Make sure you have 8 gateways, okay? 8 gates pluses. Pluses. 45 probes is going to be great. You can actually support 8 gates on 41 probes, just as a little tidbit, but 45 is nice. And that's going to allow you to just really kick in your macro engines. Notice your High Templars are just building up Storm. I would recommend that you don't move out the High Templars unless you're going out for a Zealot High Templar push, which we could do right now. We can move out right now with all of these to go punish them pre-lurker, which comes right at about 9:45. But I'm not doing that right now. I'm going to be playing for more of just like a goon timing here. That's totally okay. And now that we're right at around 9:30, let's check our benchmarks that we have to compare against. Hopefully you haven't lost that many Corsairs. Got 8 Zealots, what is this? 9 here, so 17 zealots, 4 high templars, 8 gateways, at least morphing, right? Here I'm also not going for a double forge. You could experiment with the double forge, that's totally fine. I like to just, you know, this is more of like a standard build, I guess. And I also got +2 weapons. Lately, it's more popular to get +1 armor to offset the hydras, a hydra heavy meta. But I wouldn't focus too much on that until we start reading your opponent's builds and whatnot. So I'm gonna cut it there. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed the video. Hopefully you're understanding the tactics, the builds, and how they kind of incorporate with each other. And for this week, I urge you to practice this on single player for at least 5 times, get to these benchmarks. I'll have them in the assignment sheet. And I would also ask you to practice against a Zerg opponent going 5-hatch Hydra all-in 5 times. Just find the partner, ask them, hey, can you just go 5-hatch Hydra all-in me with this, you know, lair opening build that's in my videos. Just so that you kind of understand the importance of having storm out in time and understanding the importance of scouting with your Corsairs, right? That should just be a non-negotiable thing that you have to push yourself to do, okay? Push yourself to understand that it's coming and responding to it correctly. And you'll see sometimes you might be over defending. Sometimes you miss it. Sometimes you focus too much on your build and you didn't scout it. And all these things can happen, and these are things you have to be cognitive of as you're trying to improve on this build. So gonna cut there. Hopefully that was helpful. And for those of you in the live cohort, feel free to always ask questions. If you're not, you can always just ask questions in the comments here and I'll try to get to them. But yeah, best of luck and see you next week.